I can't handle my father anymore, so I tricked him. I said, hey, we're going to take you to a 2-week all-inclusive resort and you're going to love it. All you have to do is sign here on these papers and you can go. Well, he did it without even thinking twice, but little does he know, those papers were for a retirement home that I'm sending him to. I did not grow up with my dad. My childhood was spent with my mother. My father, who was in the military, was always off to one peacekeeping mission or the other, so he was absent from the most important parts of my life. I did not get the privilege of having a father walk me to and from school. He would come home once in like 6 months and would spend like a week before going back. I think serving in the military made him find it difficult to relate to his family. He was distant and would act like the house was, well, a barrack, where he could dish out commands to his subordinates. To be honest, my mother and I only enjoyed peace whenever he was away. So you see, the father-son relationship dynamic has never been there. My mother, she was diagnosed with cancer while I got into college. She was given a few months to live, and we tried reaching out to Dad, but it was impossible as he was on the front line of the war. He would later come back home 2 weeks after she was buried, and all he did was cover my college costs before going away. That was all I got from him. Money, 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 money. My emotional needs were left unattended after my mother's death. I sort of resented him for that, and well, you could say I was now an adult in college. But even grown-ups have emotional needs too. I would give my father credit for covering the cost of my academics, but money can never replace the presence of a father in the life of his son. This is why I believe that one should probably think it through before jumping into any profession, no matter how lucrative it seems. So, I finally graduated from college as an orphan, though my father was alive, and I got a job as a real estate agent with a real estate firm. It was not long after I met Geraldine. We clicked very well, and she somewhat filled the void which had been in my heart for a long time. I proposed to her after we had dated for 3 months and she accepted. Geraldine took me to meet with her parents while the wedding preparations was in progress. While being quizzed about my background and all, I almost told my soon-to-be in-laws that I was an orphan with no siblings. I did not do that, but even if I've done so, it would still count as being technically true as I had no living siblings anywhere, and I have not heard from my father since my mother's death. The wedding day of Geraldine and I finally came as it was meant by a family event. Everything was going well until someone in military attire walked in. The fellow took halted steps and everyone wondered who he was. It was supposed to be a family ceremony where only family members are to be present. It turned out this fellow was my father. Everyone was surprised to find him there, and I was much more displeased than I was surprised. What was he doing showing up at my wedding ceremony? Well, I kept my cool because it was my wedding day, and I didn't want to behave erratically in the presence of everyone gathered. Funny enough, it would sound really stupid that I sent away the other family member which had come for my wedding. Every other person gathered there was basically from Geraldine's family. I did my best to avoid talking with my father throughout the wedding ceremony. I mean, there was nothing to say to him. He, on the other hand, wasted no time in making himself comfortable. After the wedding ceremony, I took my wife home, but my father suddenly shows up at my doorstep asking for a place to stay. He claimed that he suffered an injury that shifted the disc at his hip and caused him difficult moving, claiming he could no longer partake in the fight as he was unfit, and that was how he was honorably discharged. This was my first night as a married man, and I needed my privacy. I was still trying to dismiss him to go somewhere else before Geraldine showed up. She had heard me arguing with someone, and she pleaded with me to let my father stay as it was not right to let him wander the streets at the time. It was a 2-bedroom flat, and we had a spare room. I could not deny my newly wedded wife a request on our wedding night, so I just let him stay. Geraldine and I did not make love that night. I was too angry, and well, too angry to get intimate. We decided to take a 2-week vacation to spend some time together, and this was something we've never planned. Geraldine only suggested it so we could talk about my father. She was of the opinion that I let him stay with us for a while as he got into town. Well, I just didn't want him around me. If he was honorably discharged, as he claimed, then he was obviously being paid his pension every month and could leave the rest of his life off of it. My wife's suggestion prevailed. I let my father stay with us, but it did not mean things were okay between us. I could not relate with him as a father even if I wanted to, and it's not my fault. A bond that's never existed cannot suddenly appear overnight. My wife was the one taking care of him. My father did not let his physical impediment come between him and my life of debauchery. He soon starts frequenting casinos and bars where he's gambling off the monthly pension that was paid to him. He would sometimes come home later than I would and be reeking of alcohol. This was unfair to me. How could I be working my butt off to take care of him, but he repaid me by using his pension to engage in frivolities? I was disgusted by the whole thing, but Geraldine was just patient and understanding. It was as though she was the biological daughter of my father and I was the in-law. I ignored excesses because of her, but it got to the point one day where I just had to react. I'd come back from work very tired that day and Geraldine was panicking. She had not seen my father since she returned from work. I assumed he was probably just at the casino, which is where he always frequented. I just went on to have dinner. It was while I was having dinner that a call came in from the police station. I was asked to come down to the station and bail my father. I stopped by dinner midway and Geraldine accompanied me to the station. I got to the station and found my father detained. His dress was torn. The sergeant in charge told us that my father had beat up a guy at the casino with someone who was my age after he lost a bet to the individual, and it was the individual who had him arrested. I looked at the young man who my father beaten up, and this was someone who had a bigger physique than I. My dad broke his nose. I apologized to the young man on behalf of my father, and the sergeant persuaded the guy not to press charges when he learned that my father had served the country as a war veteran. So, I got my father out, but I was not going to keep quiet about what happened that night. I got home and immediately demanded that my father ends his visits to the casino and gambling houses that he frequently visits. He reacted by asking me to never speak to him in such a manner again, calling me an ungrateful child who had suddenly forgotten the fact that I've turned out alright because he paid my tuition fees while risking his life on the front end of the war. So, Geraldine intervened as she always did. She did not want this matter to escalate. I made a promise to my father that he would rot in jail the next time he got involved in a mess, as I would be the last person to come to his rescue. My dad did not stop his wayward lifestyle. I ignored him because it is the very thing I would do when he gets into trouble, ignoring him. Well, my wife got pregnant soon after and we had a baby boy. My son drew close to my father and my father grew fond of him. I would often come home to find the both of them spending time together. He would help out his grandson with his assignments and tell him bedtime stories just before he went to bed. My father was now playing the role that he had failed to play in my life when I was much younger. My wife, Geraldine, appreciated his efforts and the fact that he was trying to bond with his son, but it did not mean anything to me. I was just waiting for the moment he would get up, get his things, and get out. And that did not happen. A stay that was supposed to be for a brief period soon became permanent. My wife talked me into letting my father stay because our son was used to having him around. And time gradually went by, and we were preparing to celebrate my son's 4th birthday. My wife had been calling my attention to the observation she made about my father. She claimed he would sometimes make incoherent speeches and his mood could suddenly change from happy to sad. I have not noticed anything before that time, and I decided to pay close attention to see if we were living with a madman or not. My son's party proved my wife's claim to be true. We were all gathered together with a guest, and my son was about to cut his cake when my father suddenly screamed his late wife's name, and absolutely broke down in tears. The whole attention shifted from my son, who was celebrant, to the father. This was out of the blue. My father was ex-military, and he'd seen a lot in his life. Being on the front lines of war meant he killed enemies without remorse. My point is, well, he is a hard man. I never saw him shed a tear, and he got informed that his wife was dead and buried. And this was years ago. It made no sense that he was suddenly mourning her demise in the presence of everyone. I had to quickly deal with the situation by taking my father to his room. The party went on as if nothing happened, but it was clear the guests had questions in their mind. I eagerly waited for the party to end. Once the guests left, Geraldine and I went to see my father in his room. We tried finding out the reason behind his sudden outburst earlier at the party, and to our great surprise, he claimed that he could not remember what happened. It was then we decided we need to go to a doctor. I didn't sleep that night. I used that time to browse about symptoms my father was exhibiting, and the results I got from the internet stated my father was exhibiting signs of dementia, loss of recent memory, inability to communicate properly, mood swings, etc. From what was being said, his case was rapidly becoming chronic. If what I read was true, it meant that my father was good as mad. I did not jump to conclusions. I decided to wait till my father was taken to the doctor. We took him to see a specialist who confirmed my fears. After a series of evaluations and questions, he told us that my father was, though, suffering from dementia, which could be a result of traumatic events that must have occurred in his life. The doctor noted that though dementia could be caused by head injury, it was not the case with my father, as the scan to which he was subjected proved his internal organs to be fine. The doctor encouraged us that it was treatable, but warned us that we had to act fast, as my father's case was seriously worsening. He said, if not treated, it could get to the point where my father would hardly remember anyone or anything. He asked that we enrolled my father in therapy. I developed pity for my father. I hired to help come take care of my father twice a week. The duty of the house help was to my father's laundry and take him out for the evening strolls, just as the therapist my father was seeing had demanded. I was very careful about leaving my son with his granddad, though the doctor had said he was not a danger to live with as his case had not developed to the point of becoming aggressive. I did not still feel comfortable leaving my 4-year-old son with him. I made sure either I or my wife was around each time our son was spending time with grandpops. I made up my mind that once I saw the least sign of aggression or worsening, then I would send him to a psychiatric home straight away. He's been undergoing the whole therapy and all, and he sees the doctor twice a week. So far, I can't say there's a reason for improvement, though I must admit, it's not declined either. The therapist advised that we be patient and trust the process because dementia caused by a traumatic event would require a longer time to heal. What's up guys, Mr. Reddito Update 1, which came out after 3 months, and here it is. A drama occurred at home 3 months ago, and I was sitting in my living room TV with my wife when there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find 2 men in suits standing on my doorstep. They introduced themselves as representatives from a loan company and were looking for my father. Confused, I asked them what the problem was, and they claimed that my father had obtained a loan of $10,000 from their company. My wife and I were shocked as we had no acknowledgement of this, and I told them that yes, my father's around, but could not verify the claim as he's suffering from dementia. However, they insisted that I bring him to them. They probably felt I was lying, and I did as they asked, as they saw for themselves that my father could not remember what happened, nor could he communicate effectively. He just looked at the 2 strangers as they brought out the signed documents that contained his picture. It made no sense to my father. He clearly told them that he did not know who they were, and they tried further in establishing a conversation with him just to jog his memory. But he would say something only to deny saying it the next minute. I did not doubt the fact that my father may have obtained the loan as the documents bore his picture and signature. A signature that he had signed himself, but I felt that the company was counting their losses and leave as there was nothing anyone could do. Well, to my dismay, they dropped the bombshell that the loan which my father collected would be paid regardless of its current condition. They informed me that my father had actually used my car for collateral while applying for the loan, and they would have to take the car if I was not going to repay. The car in question here was recently given to me by my boss in appreciation for my hard work. Wow. I've not driven that car for up to 3 months, and I could just not let them take it away. So I promised to pay back the loan, which my father had collected, within 2 months, but they're insisting on taking the car until I cleared my father's debt. I was so angry at my father for putting me in this situation, but at the same time I felt pity for him due to his illness. I knew that I would have to work hard to repay the loan, but I was determined to do it just to save my face from shame. My father's illness has become a burden on my family, and over the next 2 months, I worked long hours to earn enough money to repay that darn loan. My wife supported me as much as she could. Finally, the day arrived when I was able to clear my father's debt, and the loan company returned my car. Although I was relieved that the situation was over, I could not help but feel sad for my father. The reverse would have been the case if he was sane, and I would simply hand over the loan to as they wished, or better still, have him arrested for using my car as collateral without my knowledge. His illness has not only affected him, but has also affected our entire family. I just hope that he recovers soon. Update number 2. So, I just discovered 2 days ago that my wife and I have been played like the fools by my father. I'd returned from work and was at home waiting for my wife and son to return from the grocery store, when I realized that my father wasn't at home. This was not one of those days when the house help who came around twice a week would take him strolling, and my wife had been gone for quite some time, so I did start to worry. When I called my wife, who was at the grocery store, we both knew something was wrong. I asked if she's gone out with my father, and her reply was no. It was clear to both of us that my father was nowhere to be found, and we started to panic. We knew that if he was out, he would not be able to find his way back home since he was suffering from dementia. My wife immediately drove back home at this point. Without wasting any time, we got into the car and drove down to the police station to report a missing person. It was a scary experience, and we hoped that he would be found soon. As we drove back home, we saw my father walking towards the house. We were both relieved to see him, but we could also not help but be curious about where he's gone. When we asked him, he said he couldn't remember. It was shocking, and we could not believe that he had walked all the way back home without knowing how he got there. We let him rest that night, but my wife and we could not hide our shock that my father, who could not remember where he's been, could remember his way home. We could smell the alcohol on his breath, and it only added to our confusion. So, the next day I decide to investigate by going to the bar down the street to ask if my father's been there. To my surprise, they acknowledged seeing him there in his right frame of mind. As a matter of fact, I heard tales about my father, which was embarrassing. They noted he was a popular face at the bar, and he loved gambling, though he mostly lost. It was then that I realized that my father's been lying to me all along about his dementia. That is the only explanation, and I had to report back to the police station the next day to inform them that my missing father, who suffered from dementia, could find his way back home, though he could not tell where he was coming from. I looked really stupid in front of these guys, and it's all thanks to my father. I feel betrayed and angry, but one thing is certain. I'll be at my father at his own game when the time's right. My wife, who has always tried being supportive of my father, now regrets the day she convinced me to open our door to him. He thinks that he got away with everything, but he doesn't have the slightest idea of what's coming his way. Update number 3. Well, I never thought I'd be the type of person to deceive my father, but when my wife and I decided it was time for my father to pay for feigning dementia, we knew we had to act quickly and decisively. We hatched a plan to send him to a retirement home where he would stay permanently. To make our plan seem less suspicious, I called my wife into the hearing of my father and informed her of my plans to send my father to a luxurious resort to stay for 2 weeks. I made sure my father overheard my conversation and watched as his face lit up with excitement at the prospect of staying at a fancy resort. Later that night, I called my father to confirm the details as his supposed trip to the luxurious resort. I told him that his therapist had advised him to change his environment just to aid in his recovery process, and my father agreed to go to the resort. I knew he would never question my decision, as he trusted me and believed that I would be his best interest at heart. Moreover, he believed that I was still in the whole dementia plot. By the time I'm done executing my plan, he'll never forget the lessons of being truthful. The next day, my wife and I took my father to sign the necessary documents for the trip to the resort. I could tell from the way he signed the documents that he was looking forward to this brief vacation of luxurious resorts, where he could wine and dine and gamble away his life without fear of being caught. Little did he know, the documents he signed meant that he would be staying permanently at a retirement home, which would be paid for with the pension being paid to him on a monthly basis. I selected the retirement home in which he would be staying, and it's one that would turn his hopes of 2 weeks in paradise into a lifetime of horror. This was not a difficult decision to make, as we knew it was the right one. My father had been feigning dementia for a while, pretending to forget important details and acting confused when it suited him. We were tired of the charade, and knew that he needed to face the consequences of his actions. As we watched my father sign the documents, my wife could not help but feel a pang of guilt, but she knew that this was the only way to make him understand the seriousness of his actions. It was time for him to take responsibility for his behavior and start living his life with honesty and integrity. Update number 4. This is like the best time of my life. A time when my father's no longer in the picture, and my father's currently in a place that could be likened to a prison. The day came when my father was to leave for his 2-week vacation at a luxurious resort, right? And my wife and I drove him down there. When we arrived at the retirement home, my father was surprised to find that it was not the resort he had been expecting. He was disappointed, but we tried to reassure him that it was still a nice place to stay just for 2 weeks. We promised to call him every day just to find out how he was faring, and would come to pick him up at the very instant he decides he no longer wants to stay at the resort. Well, it took a while to convince my father to stay, and he finally agreed. However, things quickly took a turn for the worse. For him, though, my father discovered that the home was understaffed, and the staff was not very friendly or patient. He began to complain about everything, from the food to the lack of activities. It was nothing close to what was promised. It was not a resort, neither was it luxurious. He got fed up with everything in less than 3 days, and my father soon made it known that he wanted to leave. But the management informed him that he signed up to stay there for life. The only way he could leave was if he applied to have him taken out, but we had no intention of doing that. He informed the staff to get in touch with me so he could ask me to come get him out, but I informed the staff of the retirement home that I had no intention to do that. It dawned on my father that he had been played. He had happily given up his freedom for life simply because he wanted 2 weeks of enjoyment. Well, he had been beaten at his own game. As time went on, my father became more and more restless. He attempted to escape several times, but he always failed. This made the staff cut down on his level of freedom, which only made him more miserable. I knew that my father was unhappy, but I could not bring myself to feel sorry for him. After all, he had brought this upon himself with his feign dementia. I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction knowing that he was finally paying for his deceit. I mean, you reap what you sow, right? I allowed days to turn into weeks just so that my father could learn to adapt to his new reality. I would be going to visit him with my wife this weekend, but we're not going to get him out. I'm actually going there just to look him in the eyes and make him understand the kind of joy it gave me to finally rid myself of his plague. Update 5. Final update. As soon as my wife and I arrived at the retirement home where my father was being cared for, he demanded that we get him out of there.
Son, you have to get me out of this place. I can't take it anymore.
I could see the desperation in his eyes and the unease in his voice, but I was not ready to end his suffering anytime soon. I turned to the staff and informed them that my father was suffering from dementia and that they should not pay attention to his complaints. I produced the doctor's report which substantiated my claim. However, my father insisted that he was all right and did not need to be there. He confessed to me that he only faked dementia to avoid paying back the loan that he collected from me. I was not surprised by this revelation. I discovered the truth for myself, and that was why I tricked him into the retirement home in the first place. But learning about his motive for doing that made me boil on the inside. He had used my car to obtain money which he gambled off, knowing full well that I would not be sympathetic to repay his debt. He decides to feign dementia just to play his responsibility on me. If humans had more than one lifespan, I would make sure my father spent all his lifespans in a retirement home. I turned to the staff and informed them that one of the signs of dementia is mood swings, and I urged them to place my father on constant watch. He should not be alone. Well, I told them, and my father cussed and cursed me and my wife as I made our way to leave. His erratic attitude further convinced the staff present that he truly had dementia, and as we left, I looked my father in the face and told him that he would be staying there for life, and this bill would be covered by the pension which he was being paid. I could see the shock and anger on his face, but I felt a sense of joy and satisfaction. I'd only gotten my revenge on him for feigning dementia and making him repay this debt that I paid out of pocket. My father was carried away and placed under strict supervision for life. It gave me a sense of relief to know that he was not going to escape again. I dealt with his deceit, and I knew he would be held accountable for his actions. Although my father may have believed that he had outsmarted me, it was he who had been outsmarted. It was a hard lesson for him to learn, but it was one that he would not forget anytime soon. So I just have one question about this story for you guys. If you were in OP's position, and your father was a military veteran and he came back with obvious PTSD and all this stuff that was going on, and you know that he's faking his illness of dementia, and he manages to find a way to take money using your car as collateral through the loan. So my question to you is this: what would you do if you were in OP's position? Would you press charges? Would you send him away to a retirement home like OP did? Or would you come up with some other sort of plan? I would love to hear from you guys, and maybe, I don't know, you've been through a similar situation already or know a friend who has. Go ahead and drop a comment down below about what exactly you would do. Guys, thank you so much for joining me on today's video. That's all the content for today. It did have every single update that I could find from this user, but if anything else comes out, you know to check back, so subscribe so you don't miss that. Guys, have an amazing day, and I will see you tomorrow.